Hello everyone, before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get into today's story. Mark Davis, a 23-year-old law student, was walking through the streets of Texas under a dull gray sky. The rain had been relentless all day, and his jacket, thin and soaked, did little to protect him from the chill. With every step, he felt the weight of his financial struggles. Law school wasn't cheap, and the debt left behind by his late father only added to the pressure. As he passed the familiar, yet cold, streets of the small town, Mark's thoughts were heavy, consumed by worries about his future. His phone buzzed, snapping him from his thoughts. He answered, hearing a woman's voice on the other end. "Mr. Davis, this is Eleanor Brooks. I'd like to meet with you. It's regarding your financial situation." Mark frowned, confused. "Who are you? How do you know about my situation?" "I know enough," she interrupted smoothly. "Meet me at Brooks Bistro at 7 p.m. It's important." The line went dead before he could ask another question. Mark stood there for a moment, staring at the phone, then sighed, slipping it back into his pocket. What could she want? He had no idea, but his curiosity was piqued. Later that evening, Mark entered the cozy bistro, the warmth of the restaurant a welcome relief from the cold outside. The scent of freshly brewed coffee and sizzling steaks filled the air as he scanned the room. There, at a corner table, sat Eleanor Brooks. A striking woman in her late 60s, elegantly dressed, with silver hair styled perfectly, and a confident aura that commanded respect. She looked up as Mark approached, her piercing blue eyes meeting his. "Mark," she greeted him with a slight smile, gesturing for him to sit. "Please, take a seat." Mark hesitated, wondering why he was here, but sat down across from her. "Mrs. Brooks," he began, still unsure of what was happening, "what's this about? How do you know about my situation?" She put down her cup of tea and leaned forward slightly, her tone calm but assertive. "I know about your debts, the ones your father left behind. I also know that you're struggling, and that you're on the brink of losing everything. I can help you." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle in the air. Mark looked at her, his brows furrowed. "Help me how?" he asked, his voice low, skeptical. Eleanor's expression softened, but there was no mistaking the firmness in her words. "I need a husband, Mark. A companion. Someone to share my name and my estate. In exchange, I will pay off all your debts and ensure your financial security." She let the proposal sink in, watching his reaction. Mark blinked in disbelief. "You want me to marry you? For a business deal?" he asked, still processing her words. Eleanor nodded slowly. "Yes. This isn't about romance. This is a business arrangement. You'll help me maintain control of my legacy, and I'll help you secure your future. Think of it as a contract, Mark. You'll get what you need, and so will I." Mark leaned back in his chair, his mind racing. He'd heard of people marrying for money before, but this? This felt like something out of a different world. He didn't know what to say. He was desperate, yes, but was he really ready to marry a woman he didn't even know? "I don't know," he said finally, his voice filled with uncertainty. "I need time to think about this." Eleanor didn't push him. Instead, she gave him a patient smile and a slight nod. "Of course, take your time. But remember, this offer won't last forever. You'll need to make a decision soon." Mark stood, feeling the weight of her offer pressing on him. As he left the bistro, his mind was a whirlwind of thoughts. Could he really go through with this? Marry someone he didn't know, just to fix his financial problems? It seemed impossible. But as he walked out into the night, he couldn't help but wonder. Could this be his only chance to change everything? Back in his small apartment, Mark sat on the edge of his bed, his head in his hands. His mother's worried face flashed in his mind, and the mounting pressure to save her from medical bills and secure his sister's education loomed large. He had to make a choice. His pride was holding him back, but what was more important? His dignity, or his family's future? The next morning, Mark returned to the bistro. Eleanor was already seated at the same table, calm and composed, as if she had known he would come. "You've decided?" she asked, not looking up from the tablet in front of her. Mark took a deep breath, stepping forward with resolve. "I'll do it." Eleanor set down her tablet and gave him a small, approving smile. "Good. The arrangements will be made immediately." Just like that, Mark's life changed. What began as a business deal, a fake marriage to a woman he barely knew, soon became much more than either of them could have ever expected. As Mark left the bistro, the weight of the decision settled on him. This was just the beginning of a new chapter, a chapter that would change not only his life, but also the life of someone he never imagined he'd come to care about. Now, let's dive deeper into this story and see where it takes us. Mark walked out of the bistro, his footsteps heavy as he made his way back into the cold night. His mind raced, the weight of Eleanor's proposal settling in. Could he really go through with this? Marrying a woman he didn't know for money? For the first time in his life, he was considering something he never would have imagined. He'd always believed that love was something that came naturally, but what if this was his only chance to save his family? His mother's health was deteriorating, his sister's college tuition was due, and his own future was uncertain. Mark needed tea, she needed her help. But was he willing to sacrifice his dignity for it? He didn't know. He tossed and turned that night, his mind never quiet. By morning, he had made up his mind. He had to do this for them. He could put aside his pride, and maybe, just maybe, he'd find a way to make it work. He arrived back at the bistro early, the rain now heavier than it had been the night before. As he stepped inside, the warmth of the room wrapped around him, offering a brief relief from the cold. Eleanor was already seated, waiting at the same corner table, her expression calm and expectant. She didn't seem surprised to see him, as if she had known all along that he would return. Mark walked toward her, his heart beating faster with each step. He was about to make a choice that would change everything. "You've decided?" Eleanor's voice was calm, but there was a hint of something beneath the surface, anticipation, maybe? She didn't look up from her tablet, but Mark could see the faintest smile tug at the corner of her lips. Mark nodded, his voice steady but filled with uncertainty. "Yes. I'll do it." Eleanor placed her tablet down, her eyes meeting his. There was something about her that made him feel like she saw right through him, that she knew his every thought before he even spoke. "Good," she said simply, her smile now more pronounced. "We'll begin the arrangements right away." Mark didn't say anything else. He couldn't bring himself to. He had made his decision, and now, he just had to follow through. As he sat down across from Eleanor, the reality of the situation hit him. He was agreeing to a marriage that wasn't real, to a life that wasn't his. But it was the only way to secure a future for his family. As the details of the contract were discussed, Eleanor made it clear that their marriage would be purely business. There would be no love, no emotional attachment. It was just a way for her to secure her legacy and for him to escape the crushing weight of his debts. The agreement was clear: he would play the role of her husband in public, and in return, his debts would be paid off, his future secured. But there would be no romance, no expectation of feelings. They would each go their separate ways in private, but the marriage would remain a facade for the world to see. Mark listened carefully, absorbing the terms of the deal. He had always prided himself on making his own way in life, but now, he was choosing the easy way out. Or so he thought. As the meeting ended and he walked out of the bistro, he felt a knot in his stomach. This was not how he imagined his life turning out. A fake marriage, to save face and his family's legacy? It didn't feel real. But then again, was it ever supposed to? Over the next few weeks, Mark found himself slipping into his new role. He accompanied Eleanor to high-profile events, posing as her husband for the public, putting on the smile that the world expected to see. At first, it was easy. They barely interacted, their conversations shallow and professional, and Mark quickly learned to keep his distance emotionally. He focused on the arrangement, the payments that were being made to settle his debts, the secure future for his family. But something began to shift, something he hadn't expected. The more time he spent with Eleanor, the more he saw a different side of her. She wasn't just a businesswoman, cold and calculating. There was a warmth in her eyes when she talked about her past, her family, and the legacy she was so determined to protect. It wasn't love, but it was something deeper, a respect, a connection that he hadn't felt with anyone in years. Mark started to wonder if maybe he had misjudged her. Was this really just a contract? Was it possible that over time, something real could develop between them? One night, after a particularly difficult charity gala where they had to put on their perfect married couple act, they found themselves alone in a quiet corner of the hotel. Mark was exhausted, both mentally and emotionally, and he sat on a plush chair, running a hand through his hair. Eleanor stood by the window, her back to him. She didn't turn around as she spoke, but her voice was softer than usual. "I know this wasn't your choice, Mark," she said quietly. "And I know it must be hard for you. But I appreciate what you're doing. I know it's not easy." Mark looked up at her, surprised by the vulnerability in her tone. She wasn't just the powerful businesswoman he had first thought. There was more to her, a side that she kept hidden from everyone. Slowly, he stood and walked toward her, his voice softer now. "I'm doing it for my family," he said, his eyes meeting hers. "But I never thought it would be like this. I never thought I'd get to know you like this." Eleanor turned around, her expression unreadable. For a moment, they just stood there, the air between them charged with something unspoken. Mark couldn't put his finger on it, but he felt something shift, something that told him this arrangement was no longer just a contract. The lines between fake and real had begun to blur. But was it too late to turn back? And so, the story continued, with both of them walking a fine line between what was real and what was a carefully constructed facade. Neither of them knew yet where this path would lead, but one thing was certain: everything had changed. Mark sat in his office late one night, staring out at the city lights below. The weight of his decision hung heavy in the air. What had started as a simple business arrangement had become something he wasn't prepared for. Eleanor had become more than just a business partner. He found himself thinking about her more than he cared to admit. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was something else, something he hadn't expected. She wasn't the cold, calculating woman he had assumed. There was a warmth to her, a vulnerability hidden behind the sharp business persona she projected to the world. And with each passing day, he found himself growing more and more curious about the woman behind the facade. They had attended more charity events, more galas, and each time, he felt the connection between them growing stronger, even if it was unspoken. Mark couldn't deny it anymore, something was happening. The lines between fake and real were becoming blurred. He wasn't sure if he was ready to admit it, but he was starting to care for her. It wasn't until the evening of one particular event that Mark finally allowed himself to confront the feelings he had been pushing aside. The gala was held at a grand hotel, one of those lavish, high-society events where everyone was dressed to impress. As they made their way through the crowd, Mark noticed how effortlessly Eleanor moved. She was poised, confident, every inch the businesswoman he had come to know. But tonight, something was different. She looked at him with a soft smile, her eyes lingering for just a moment longer than usual. It wasn't the smile of a business partner, it was something more personal, something that made Mark's heart beat a little faster. They moved through the room, exchanging pleasantries with guests, but all Mark could think about was the way Eleanor had looked at him. He couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just an act anymore. After the event, they found themselves alone in a quiet corner of the hotel lobby, away from the hustle and bustle of the gala. Eleanor stood by the window, looking out at the city below, her hands resting lightly on the sill. Mark stood a few feet away, his thoughts racing. He had to say something. "Eleanor," he began, his voice low but steady. I don't know what's happening between us, but it feels like this whole thing has changed. It's not just business anymore, is it? Eleanor didn't turn around immediately. She stood there for a moment, the silence between them heavy, before finally speaking. No, it's not, she replied, her voice quieter than usual, as if she were unsure of how to proceed. It started as a contract, but somewhere along the way it became something else. Mark took a step closer, his heart racing. He could feel the tension in the air, the unspoken words hanging between them. I never meant for this to happen. I never thought I'd care about you like this, he confessed. It was the truth, even though he hadn't fully understood it until now. Eleanor finally turned to face him, her eyes meeting his with a mixture of uncertainty and something else, something Mark couldn't quite place. I didn't either, she admitted, her voice soft, almost vulnerable. But we can't ignore it. Not anymore. For a moment, neither of them said anything. They just stood there, the weight of the situation settling in. Mark could feel his emotions swirling: confusion, fear, and a deep sense of longing. What was this? Was it love? Or was it something else entirely? As the silence stretched on, Eleanor spoke again, her voice steady but filled with emotion. Mark, I can't pretend anymore. I thought this would be easier, just a contract, just business. But now, I can't deny what I'm feeling. And I think you feel it too. Mark nodded, his throat tight. I do feel it. But I don't know what to do with it. This wasn't supposed to happen. This was just a way out for me, a way to fix my problems. I didn't expect to care about you. She took a step closer to him, her gaze never leaving his. You don't have to do anything, Mark, she said softly. We're in this together now. Whatever happens, we'll figure it out. For the first time, Mark felt like the world wasn't so heavy. Maybe this wasn't just a business arrangement. Maybe they were starting to build something real. But the fear still lingered. Could they really turn this fake marriage into something lasting? Could they build a life together, despite the unconventional way it all started? As the night went on, the two of them talked for hours, their conversation flowing easily now, no longer filled with the awkwardness of a contract. They shared stories, their hopes, their fears. For the first time, they weren't just playing a role. They were getting to know each other, truly getting to know the people behind the facade. And in that moment, Mark realized something he hadn't before. This wasn't just about a contract anymore. This was about two people, finding a way to make something real out of what had started as nothing more than a business deal. The next morning, as Mark woke up and got ready for another day, he couldn't shake the feeling that everything had shifted. What had started as a simple agreement was now something more complicated, but also more beautiful than he ever could have imagined. The journey ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, Mark felt like he wasn't alone. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. The days that followed were filled with quiet moments and subtle changes. Mark and Eleanor continued their public act as a married couple, but the line between what was real and what was fake began to blur. They spent more time together, not just at events, but in private too. Mark couldn't help but notice the small things, the way Eleanor would smile when she talked about her late parents, or how she would pause when asked about her past, as if she was trying to keep some part of herself locked away. He began to understand her more, seeing the cracks in her confident exterior. And with each passing day, he found himself more drawn to her, not just as his wife by contract, but as someone he genuinely cared about. One evening, after another successful gala, they found themselves alone again in a quiet corner of the hotel. The room was dim, the city lights filtering through the windows, casting a soft glow. Eleanor was sitting by the window, staring out at the skyline. Mark stood by the door, watching her. There was a hesitation in his chest, a feeling he couldn't ignore any longer. Eleanor, he said softly, his voice breaking the silence. I've been thinking a lot about us. About everything. Eleanor turned her head slightly, her eyes meeting his. There was a quiet understanding in her gaze. She didn't speak, but she nodded, as if waiting for him to continue. Mark took a deep breath and stepped closer. I know this started as a business arrangement, and I thought I could handle it. I thought I could separate my emotions from all of this. But now he trailed off, not sure how to put the feelings into words. But now, I can't pretend anymore. I don't want to just be a husband in name. I want something more. I want to be real with you. The room felt heavy as Eleanor stood up and walked toward him, her steps measured but sure. Mark, she began, her voice calm but thick with emotion. I don't know what's happening between us, but I know that something has changed. I've been trying to ignore it, but I can't either. She took a small step closer, her hand gently brushing his arm. We're both here, in this together. And I think we both know that what we have is not just business anymore. Mark's heart raced. He wanted to reach out, but the vulnerability in the moment made him hesitant. He took another step forward, closing the distance between them. His eyes searched hers for any sign of doubt, but all he saw was honesty. She was feeling the same pull, the same connection. So, what do we do now? He asked, his voice low. Eleanor smiled softly, a hint of sadness in her eyes. I think we take it one step at a time. We've come this far, Mark. I don't want to keep pretending. But I need to know that this is something real. That you're not just doing this because you feel obligated, or because you think you have no other choice. Mark reached out and gently cupped her face in his hands, his thumb brushing her cheek. I'm not pretending, Eleanor. I'm here because I want to be. I care about you. More than I ever thought I could. This isn't just about saving my family anymore. This is about us. The air between them seemed to crackle with energy, and for the first time in weeks, Mark felt a sense of peace. This wasn't a business deal anymore. It was something deeper, something real. Eleanor leaned into his touch, her eyes fluttering shut for a moment as if she were allowing herself to feel the same truth. As they stood there, together in the quiet room, Mark realized that their lives had irrevocably changed. The arrangement, which had begun as a way to escape their individual problems, had evolved into something neither of them had expected: a bond, a connection that was as genuine as it was surprising. And so, as the night wore on, Mark and Eleanor found themselves standing at the edge of a new chapter. One that neither of them had planned, but one they were both ready to embrace. Their journey was far from over, but for the first time, it didn't matter. They had each other now. The next morning, Mark woke up with a sense of calm he hadn't felt in a long time. He looked over at Eleanor, who was still asleep beside him. She had trusted him with her heart, and he had trusted her with his. As he lay there, watching her sleep, he realized that this was what he had been missing all along. It wasn't the money, the status, or the business deal. It was love. And in this moment, he was no longer pretending. He was living the truth. This was just the beginning of their new life together. And for the first time, Mark was truly ready for it. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of change. Mark and Eleanor continued their public appearances as a married couple, but now there was an undeniable shift in their dynamic. They were no longer just playing a part for the world. Mark found himself looking at Eleanor differently. The woman he had once seen as a distant business partner was now someone he admired and cared for deeply. And Eleanor, though still cautious, began to let her guard down. She didn't need to pretend with Mark anymore. The walls she had carefully built around her heart began to crumble, piece by piece. One afternoon, as they were returning from a meeting, Eleanor invited Mark to her penthouse for dinner. It had been a long week of meetings and events, and the idea of a quiet evening together felt like the perfect escape. Mark wasn't sure what to expect, but the warmth in her voice made him eager to spend time with her outside of the public eye. When he arrived, the soft aroma of homemade dinner greeted him at the door. Eleanor had prepared a simple meal, nothing extravagant, just something comforting. It was a stark contrast to the lavish parties and events they usually attended. The fact that she had taken the time to cook for him felt like a gesture of trust, of opening up in a way she hadn't before. "I hope you're hungry," she said, her smile genuine as she set the table. Mark sat down, the familiar tension of their earlier days now replaced by something new, something warm. As they ate, the conversation flowed easily, no longer awkward or forced. They talked about everything: business, their pasts, the future. Eleanor opened up about her upbringing, her parents, the decisions that had led her to build the empire she had. Mark listened, captivated by her story, by the woman who was so much more than the calculated CEO she appeared to be. After dinner, they moved to the living room. Sitting on the couch, Mark could feel the quiet hum of the evening settling around them, the comfortable silence between them, not awkward, but peaceful. He found himself leaning in, his heart racing as he realized just how much he wanted this, wanted her. He had never expected to find this connection, especially not with someone like Eleanor. But there it was, undeniable. Eleanor seemed to sense the change in him, and she too felt the pull. She hesitated for a moment before speaking, her voice soft and vulnerable. "Mark, I've been thinking about everything. This marriage, us. It started as something entirely different. I never expected to feel this way. But now, it's hard to ignore what's between us." Mark's pulse quickened as he reached for her hand. "I know. I've been trying to fight it, but it's real, Eleanor. I want this. I want you." For a moment, Eleanor said nothing, her gaze softening. She squeezed his hand, and for the first time since this whole arrangement began, Mark saw her as just a woman, someone who had her own vulnerabilities, her own fears. And in that moment, he knew he wasn't the only one who had been hiding parts of himself. "I've been afraid, too," she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. "Afraid of what this could mean. Afraid of letting go of control. But when I look at you, I don't feel afraid anymore." Mark pulled her closer, his heart racing as he cupped her face in his hands. "Then don't be afraid. We can do this, Eleanor. Together. No more pretending. This is real. You and me." They leaned in, their lips meeting in a kiss that was gentle at first, testing the waters of what they were beginning to build. But it quickly deepened, both of them giving in to the emotions they had been denying for so long. It wasn't just a kiss, it was a promise, a commitment to the future they were finally ready to embrace together. The days that followed were filled with new understanding. Mark and Eleanor's bond grew stronger, no longer built on a contract, but on real feelings. They began to make plans for their future, not just as business partners, but as a family. The world may have still seen them as a couple created out of necessity, but in their hearts, it was becoming something much more beautiful. It wasn't just about saving his family Anna Marie, it was about creating a future, together. As they stood side by side, preparing for another public appearance, Mark took Eleanor's hand in his. For the first time in a long time, he felt complete. They were no longer just playing the roles they had been given. They had created their own story, one that was real, and one they were both ready to live. And with that, Mark knew that no matter what came next, they would face it together. Because sometimes, life's greatest surprises come when you least expect them, when you let go of the control and allow yourself to be truly open to what's in front of you. As the weeks passed, Mark and Eleanor found themselves adjusting to a new rhythm in their lives. What had started as a mere contract had slowly transformed into something deeper, something neither of them had expected. Mark's feelings for Eleanor had only grown stronger, and with each passing day, he found himself more willing to put aside the walls he had built around his heart. Eleanor, too, was changing. The once cautious businesswoman who had kept her emotions locked away was now opening up in ways Mark had never imagined. She was still strong, still sharp, but there was a vulnerability in her eyes that spoke volumes. They no longer hid behind their roles as husband and wife for appearances now, they were beginning to trust each other in ways that felt genuine and real. One evening, after another long day of meetings, Mark and Eleanor sat together in their private space, away from the public eye. The penthouse was quiet, the city lights twinkling below like a sea of stars. Eleanor had made dinner again, a simple meal, but this time there was something different about it. The atmosphere between them was charged, filled with an unspoken anticipation. As they ate, they talked about the future, what it might hold for them, both as individuals and as a couple. It wasn't just about business anymore. They had started to think about their lives beyond the walls of their carefully constructed world. "Mark," Eleanor said, her voice soft but steady, "I've been thinking about our future, about where this is all heading. I know we didn't start this marriage because of love, but somewhere along the way, I think we've both changed. I don't know what this is, exactly, but I don't want to go back to how things were." Mark put down his fork, his heart racing as he listened to her words. He had been feeling the same way, but hearing her say it aloud made it all the more real. "I don't want to go back either," he admitted, his voice low. "I know we've had our doubts, but I think we've built something here. Something worth fighting for." Eleanor smiled, a small, almost shy smile, and reached across the table, taking his hand in hers. "Then let's keep building it. Let's not let this just be about business, about saving face. Let's make it real. For both of us." Mark squeezed her hand, the weight of her words settling in his chest. It wasn't just about saving his family anymore, or fulfilling a contract. This was about creating something together, something meaningful, something that would last. Over the next few months, their connection only deepened. They spent more time together, not just attending events, but building a life beyond the public eye. They shared their hopes and fears, their dreams and doubts. Eleanor even began to open up about the losses she had endured, her family, the decisions she had made to get where she was. Mark listened, understanding more of the woman behind the powerful persona. And slowly, she began to share more of herself with him, no longer keeping her emotions locked away. It wasn't easy, but it was real. One day, Mark surprised Eleanor by planning a weekend getaway, a quiet retreat away from the hustle and bustle of their usual lives. It was just the two of them, no cameras, no obligations. Just time to themselves. As they arrived at the cozy cabin nestled in the woods, Mark could feel the tension of their busy lives begin to melt away. They spent the weekend hiking, cooking meals together, and simply enjoying each other's company. It was a much-needed escape from the pressures of their public lives, and it reminded both of them of what they had found in each other. By the end of the weekend, they were closer than ever. On their last night in the cabin, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Eleanor turned to Mark, her eyes soft and full of emotion. "I've never felt more at peace than I do right now," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you for this. For everything." Mark smiled, his heart swelling with affection for her. "You don't need to thank me," he replied, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm the one who should be thanking you. You've changed my life, Eleanor. I never thought I could feel this way. I never thought I could let go of my fears and just be happy." Eleanor leaned her head on his shoulder, and for a moment, they sat in silence, the sound of the wind rustling through the trees the only noise around them. It was a quiet moment, but it was enough. They didn't need to say anything more. The next morning, as they packed up to leave the cabin and return to the real world, Mark felt a sense of calm he hadn't experienced before. He knew there would be challenges ahead, but for the first time, he wasn't afraid of them. He had Eleanor by his side, and together, they could face anything. This wasn't just a marriage built on a contract anymore. It was a partnership, a bond that had grown from something forced into something real. As they drove back to the city, Mark looked over at Eleanor, his hand resting on hers. "We're in this together," he said, his voice full of conviction. "And no matter what happens, I'm not going anywhere." Eleanor smiled, her eyes meeting his. "I know," she said softly. "And I'm not going anywhere either." With that, they knew that they had finally found what they had both been searching for, not just in each other, but in themselves. Love, trust, and a future they were ready to build, together. As the months went by, Mark and Eleanor settled into a new routine, one that felt more like a real marriage than the business arrangement it had started as. They had started to build something real, and both of them were determined to see it through. They no longer needed to pretend for the outside world. They were no longer the perfect couple for show. They were a team, two people who had found comfort in each other's company and strength in each other's love. Eleanor, once so guarded, was beginning to open up in ways Mark had never expected. The woman who had always been in control, who had built her empire with sharp precision, was now letting herself be vulnerable. And for the first time, Mark didn't feel like he was simply living in a world of obligations. He was living for himself, for Eleanor, for their future. It was at a charity gala, one of the many events they had attended over the past year, that Mark realized how far they had come. The evening was filled with familiar faces, powerful people, but tonight it felt different. As they entered the ballroom, Eleanor stood tall beside him, her usual confidence radiating from her. But as they moved through the crowd, Mark noticed something he had never seen before. Her eyes softened when they met his. She wasn't just playing the part of the loving wife anymore. She was there with him, beside him, completely in the moment. And for the first time in a long while, Mark felt like the whole world had faded away. It was just the two of them, in this moment, together. As the evening wore on, they found themselves at a quiet table in the corner of the ballroom, away from the chatter and clinking glasses. Eleanor, always the composed woman, was now allowing herself to laugh, her head tilted back as she shared a funny memory from her childhood. Mark couldn't help but watch her, mesmerized by the woman who had become not just his partner, but his best friend. He realized that this was the woman he had been falling in love with all along, even before he had recognized it. "You know," he said softly, his voice just above a whisper, "I never imagined that we would end up here, like this. When we first started this I thought it was just a way out for me. But now, I see that it's so much more. I see you. And I see us. And I'm not just doing this for my family anymore. I'm doing it for you. For us." Eleanor's eyes softened as she reached across the table, her hand covering his. Her smile was warm, full of something deeper than she had ever shown before. "I know," she said, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "I've felt it too. This isn't just about a business deal anymore. It's real. And I want this. I want us." Mark's heart swelled as she spoke. They had come so far from where they had started. What had been a lifeline for both of them had turned into something beautiful, something unexpected. And yet, there was still that lingering feeling. What would happen when the world found out? Would they still be accepted, or would their relationship be seen as a business transaction again? As if reading his thoughts, Eleanor squeezed his hand, her voice calm but firm. "Whatever happens, we'll face it together. We've already built something real. And no one can take that away from us." Mark nodded, feeling more certain than ever that this was the right path. They had fought for this for each other and it was something worth protecting. The road ahead might not always be easy, but for the first time, he wasn't afraid of it. The next day, as they walked out of the gala, hand in hand, Mark looked at Eleanor with a sense of peace. The world could see them however it wanted. But they knew the truth. Their marriage was no longer just a contract. It was their life, their love. And they would build their future on that foundation. As the night ended, and they returned to their private life, Mark couldn't help but think back to when this all started. What had begun as a desperate measure, a way to escape, had blossomed into something far greater. He had found love, trust, and a partner in Eleanor. And that was more than he could have ever hoped for. As the weeks passed, Mark and Eleanor's relationship continued to grow stronger, but the pressure of living under the public eye never fully went away. The media, always hungry for news stories, had begun to speculate more openly about their relationship. What had started as a business arrangement was now being portrayed as something deeper, but there were still whispers and doubts surrounding the authenticity of their bond. Mark and Eleanor both knew they had to be careful. They couldn't let their emotions sway their decisions, not when so much was at stake. Despite the doubts of others, they remained focused on what they had built together, a love born out of something unexpected, but real nonetheless. One afternoon, as they sat in the penthouse after a long day of meetings, Eleanor broke the silence, her voice thoughtful. "Mark, I know the world is watching us. People are talking about us. But I want you to know, none of that matters to me. What we have is real, and no one can take that away." Mark looked over at her, his heart swelling with pride. He knew exactly what she meant. They had fought for this, for each other, and nothing would come between them. You're right, he replied, his voice filled with conviction. We've come so far, Eleanor. We've built something real. And I'm not letting anyone take that away from us. Not now, not ever. As they talked, Eleanor's eyes softened, and she reached across the table to take his hand. I've been thinking a lot about the future, she said, her voice quiet. About what we want, what we need. And I think we're ready for the next step. Mark raised an eyebrow, intrigued. What do you mean? Eleanor's smile was gentle, full of warmth. I think it's time we stop hiding behind the contract. We've built something real, something beautiful, and I don't want to keep pretending that it's just about business. I want to be with you, Mark. Not just as a husband in name, but as someone who means everything to me. I want us to be real, fully, in every way. Mark's breath caught in his chest. He had known this day would come, but hearing her say it out loud made everything feel more concrete, more permanent. He had never imagined he could feel this way, not about someone like Eleanor. But now, in this moment, he knew she was everything to him. I want that too, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I want to be yours, fully, completely. No more pretending. No more boundaries. Just us. Eleanor's eyes glistened with unshed tears, and she squeezed his hand. We've been through so much together. I've learned to trust you in ways I never thought possible. And now, I want to build a future with you, one that's ours, with no more barriers. Mark stood up, his heart pounding in his chest as he walked around the table to stand beside her. He gently cupped her face in his hands, looking into her eyes with a deep, unwavering intensity. Eleanor, he said, his voice low and full of promise, I will never let you go. This is real. We are real. And I will spend the rest of my life making sure you know that. For a moment, neither of them spoke. They simply stood there, their hearts beating in sync, their bond unspoken but undeniable. It was a moment of pure connection, one that neither of them had expected, but one they both knew was the beginning of something beautiful. As the days went on, they made plans for their future together. It wasn't just about business or appearances anymore. It was about love, trust, and a life they wanted to build side by side. The world might still be watching, still waiting for them to stumble, but Mark and Eleanor knew the truth: they were no longer just a contract. They were partners, a team, and nothing could change that. On a quiet evening, as they sat together in the penthouse overlooking the city, Eleanor leaned her head on Mark's shoulder, feeling the weight of the world lift off her shoulders. She had found something she never thought possible: someone who truly saw her, who truly cared for her, and she was finally ready to embrace it, fully and completely. Mark kissed the top of her head, holding her close. We're in this together, Eleanor. And I'm not going anywhere. And in that moment, as the city lights sparkled below them, they both knew that their journey had only just begun. They had faced the doubts, the fears, and the pressure, and come out stronger for it. Now, they were ready to face the future, together. Mark and Eleanor sat together in the quiet of their penthouse, the city lights twinkling outside the window, casting a soft glow over the room. It had been a long, uncertain journey, one neither of them had expected. But here they were, stronger, closer, and more in love than they had ever imagined. As they sat in silence, Mark couldn't help but reflect on how far they had come. What had started as a business arrangement, a way to solve their respective problems, had turned into something far more beautiful. Their love had grown from trust, from shared vulnerability, and from the commitment they had made to each other. Eleanor had become more than just his wife. She had become his partner, his confidant, and his greatest support. They had faced doubts, challenges, and public scrutiny, but they had come out stronger on the other side. Eleanor turned to Mark, her eyes soft with emotion. I've been thinking, she said, her voice gentle. We've come a long way. I never thought I would find someone like you. Not just someone to share a contract with, but someone to build a real future with. And I don't want this life we've created to be something we look back on and think we could have done more. Mark smiled, his heart swelling with affection. He knew exactly what she meant. The love they had wasn't just about the contract, it wasn't just about the business. It was about the life they were creating together. And he wanted to build that life, to make it everything they both dreamed of. I agree, he said, his voice steady. We've come this far, and now it's time for the next chapter. Together. I want to make our future real, not just for us, but for everything we've been through to get here. Eleanor nodded, her smile growing. Let's make it our own. No more hiding behind anything. No more pretending. This is us, Mark. This is who we are. They both knew the road ahead wouldn't always be easy. There would be moments of doubt, challenges to face, and the world would continue to watch them, waiting for them to stumble. But that no longer mattered. What mattered was what they had built, a relationship based on trust, love, and mutual respect. They were no longer playing a role, they were living their truth. As they stood together in the room, the weight of their journey now felt light, as if the heavy burdens they had carried had been lifted. Eleanor took Mark's hand and led him to the balcony, where they both looked out at the city that had once been a symbol of the life they were trying to escape. Now, it was a symbol of the life they were choosing to create. A life filled with love, with honesty, and with the certainty that they were no longer pretending. Mark looked down at their intertwined hands, his heart full. You've given me something I never thought I would have, he said quietly. Something real. And I promise I will never take it for granted. Eleanor squeezed his hand, her eyes meeting his with a deep, unwavering trust. We've both changed, Mark. We've both learned how to love in ways we never thought possible. And now, we get to choose what comes next. Mark leaned in and kissed her, a soft, tender kiss that spoke volumes about what they had built together. It was a promise. A promise to face the future together, to continue building their life, and to never go back to the past. They had made it this far. And now, they were ready for whatever came next. As they stood there, wrapped in each other's arms, they knew that this was only the beginning. They had already built something incredible, something that no one could take away from them. And the best part was, they were just getting started. And with that, they both knew their love story had only just begun.